The smell of pine resin never really leaves a woodshop. Even after 30 years, even after the machines go cold and the sawdust settles and the man who built everything inside it is gone. I noticed it the moment I stepped through the side door that Tuesday morning, 2 days after my father's funeral. That sharp, clean, honest smell, pine and cedar, and something older underneath it, like the Oregon earth itself had soaked into the floorboards. I'm Daniel Mercer, 31 years old, married 4 years. No children, though my wife said we'd talk about it when the time was right. The time was never quite right. My father built the workshop with his own hands in 1987, the year before I was born. 1,200 square feet behind the house on Crestview Road, filled with hand tools and machines he'd collected over a lifetime of careful, patient work. He made furniture. Not the kind you buy at a store. The kind that gets passed down. The kind that holds the shape of every hand that ever touched it. He died on a Wednesday. Heart attack, quiet, in his sleep. The doctor said he likely didn't feel anything. I'm not sure if that was meant to comfort me or not. I drove up from Portland alone. My wife said she couldn't get away from work. Her brother had some kind of commitment. Her mother sent a card. I buried my father with just 2 of his old friends from the lumberyard and my brother standing beside me at the grave. My brother is 4 years older than me, broad-shouldered, always the one people called reliable. He gave a short speech. He cried. I held the folded flag from the coffin and didn't say much at all. What I didn't know, standing there in the rain at Maplewood Cemetery, was that my father had left something for me. Something he'd kept quiet for reasons I would only begin to understand later. And what I also didn't know was that by the time I learned about it, the people I trusted most were already making plans. My father's attorney called me the morning of the second day. A calm man named Gerald Holt, who my father had apparently known since the mid-90s. He asked me to come by the office before I drove back to Portland. Just me, he said. Not with family. I remember thinking that was a strange thing to specify. I sat across from Gerald Holt in a small office that smelled like old coffee and legal pads, and he slid a manila folder across the desk without much preamble. Inside was a will. Not the one filed with the county. A second one, handwritten, notarized separately, dated 14 months ago. In it, my father had left me the workshop, the land it sat on 2.5 acres behind the family home, and a savings account I had never known existed. $87,000. Accumulated quietly over decades, never mentioned at a single family dinner. Gerald also handed me a sealed envelope with my name written on the front in my father's careful block lettering. The kind of handwriting a man develops when he spends his life measuring twice and cutting once. I didn't open it in the office. I thanked Gerald, folded everything back into the envelope, and drove to the workshop. The side door was unlocked. It was always unlocked. My father said a lock on a workshop was an insult to the tools inside. I sat on a workbench stool in the middle of that pine-smelling room and opened my father's letter. His words were short. He was never a man who used more words than necessary. Daniel, the workshop is yours. I always knew it would be. You're the one who came back here on weekends just to sit with me while I worked. You never asked for anything. That tells a man everything he needs to know about his children. I've watched things carefully these past few years. I've seen who asks questions about what things are worth and who asks how something is made. Keep what I built. Don't let them turn it into something it isn't. I love you, son, Dad. I read it 3 times. Then I sat very still for a long time, listening to the wind move through the cedar planks of the roof. I drove back to the house to collect a few things before heading to Portland. My wife was flying up to meet me the following morning, she'd said. She wanted to help sort through things. I'd told her I appreciated that. I parked in the gravel drive and walked toward the back door. The kitchen light was on. Through the window I could see my brother at the table, phone pressed to his ear, a yellow legal pad in front of him with writing on it. I raised my hand to knock. Then I heard my wife's voice through his phone. He put her on speaker. I went still. Did he say anything about the workshop? Her voice was clear and flat in a way I had never quite heard before. Not the voice she used with me. A different register entirely. My brother leaned back in the chair. He didn't say much of anything. You know how he gets. Quiet. The land alone has to be worth $300,000 easy. Maybe more if you zone it commercial. I know what it's worth, my brother said. That's why we need to move before he talks to an attorney. Once it's in probate it gets complicated. A pause. Then my wife again. He trusts you. Tell him the workshop needs too much work. Tell him it's a liability. Tell him you'll handle the estate if he just signs it over. He'll do it. He always does whatever you tell him. My brother laughed. Low and easy. The laugh I'd known my whole life. He's not going to be difficult about it, he said. He doesn't have the spine for it. Never did. I stood in the dark beside that back door for what felt like a very long time. The gravel was wet under my shoes. Somewhere in the trees behind the property, something moved a branch, a bird. I breathed slowly and did not knock. I walked back to my car. I sat in the driver's seat without turning the engine on. I put my father's letter on the passenger seat where I could see his handwriting. I've seen who asks questions about what things are worth and who asks how something is made. He had known. Not everything, maybe, but enough. Enough to write the second will. Enough to call Gerald Holt 14 months ago. Enough to make sure that by the time the people around me started making calculations, the math had already been done. I did not go back inside that night. I drove to a motel in town, checked in under my name because I had nothing to hide, and spent 2 hours on the phone with Gerald Holt. He was not surprised to hear from me. He sounded, if anything, like he had been expecting the call. The second will was valid. Properly notarized, properly witnessed. The workshop and the land were mine. The account was mine. There was nothing to contest. Nothing to negotiate. Nothing that required my brother's signature or my wife's approval. I also called a friend from college named Theo, who had gone into family law. He picked up on the third ring. I told him I needed to understand what my wife was and wasn't entitled to from an inheritance. He asked me a few questions. Then he was quiet for a moment. Inherited property is separate property, he said. As long as you don't commingle it, don't put her name on it, don't deposit it into a joint account, she has no claim. None. I thanked him. Then I asked if he handled divorce cases. He said he did. I slept better that night than I had in years. Not because anything was fixed, but because for the first time in a long time, I could see the shape of things clearly. The next morning, my wife called at 7:15. Her flight had landed. She was at the airport renting a car. Her voice was warm and slightly rushed, the voice she used when she was performing warmth for an audience that wasn't entirely present. "I'm so sorry I couldn't be there sooner," she said. "How are you holding up?" I told her I was fine. I told her I'd meet her at the house around noon. I told her there was no rush. What I didn't tell her was that Gerald Holt had already filed the estate documents that morning, establishing clear title in my name for the workshop and property. What I didn't tell her was that I had already opened a new individual account at a credit union in town and transferred the $87,000 into it. What I didn't tell her was that Theo had already drafted the initial paperwork. I drove to the workshop instead. I arrived before 8. I walked every inch of it slowly, which I hadn't done in years. Workbenches my father had built himself from ash and Douglas fir. Tools hanging on pegboard walls, each one outlined in pencil so you always knew where it belonged. A half-finished rocking chair in the corner, joints fitted and waiting for the final sanding, a project my father would not get to complete. I sat next to that unfinished chair for a long time. Around 10:30, the workshop door opened. I hadn't heard a car. My brother walked in, hands in his jacket pockets, the expression on his face the one he'd been using on me since we were kids. Reasonable. Patient. Slightly superior. "Thought I'd find you here," he said. I didn't answer. He looked around the workshop the way a developer looks at an empty lot. "Dad kept this place up," he said. "It's in good shape." "It is," I said. "You know," he began, and I recognized the tone immediately, the setup, the preamble designed to make whatever came next sound like generosity. "Handling all this is going to be a lot. The estate, the house, the property. I've got more bandwidth for it right now. If you want, I can take the workshop situation off your plate. You've got enough going on." I looked at him for a moment. "I talked to Gerald Holt yesterday," I said. Something shifted in his face. Almost invisible, but I'd spent 31 years reading that face. "Oh yeah? What'd he say?" "He said the workshop and the land were already transferred into my name. Clear title, filed yesterday morning." My brother was quiet. "He also sent me a copy of the full asset disclosure," I continued, "including the note Dad made about the savings account. Daniel, I also want you to know," I said, "that I parked in the driveway last night before I went to the motel. I heard your phone call." The workshop was very quiet. Wind moved outside. The smell of pine was everywhere. My brother looked at the floor for a moment. Then he looked up with an expression that was trying to find some version of this where he could still come out even. "You have to understand." "I understand," I said. "You don't need to explain it. We weren't going to cut you out completely. We just thought." "I know what you thought," I said. "You thought I didn't have the spine for it." He had nothing to say to that. I stood up from the workbench. I handed him a piece of paper. He looked at it slowly. "What is this?" "It's a list of every tool in this workshop," I said. "Dad made it 2 years ago for insurance purposes. I found it in the filing cabinet this morning. It's notarized." I paused. "I want you to understand that I know exactly what's here and what isn't. In case there's any confusion later. He set the paper down on the workbench. He didn't say anything. He walked out the way he came in, gravel crunching under his boots, and I listened until the sound faded. I called Theo and told him to move forward. My wife arrived at the house at 12:15. She was dressed nicely, which I noticed. She looked around the house with the particular attention of someone cataloging rather than mourning, though I was sure she didn't know I was watching for it. We sat in the living room. She made all the appropriate gestures of sympathy. She asked about the estate gently, with the specific gentleness of someone who has rehearsed the question. "Your brother said there's the workshop property," she said. "That's going to be complicated to deal with." "Actually," I said, "it's already handled." She looked at me. "What do you mean?" "Dad left it to me directly. It's already in my name. Gerald Holt filed yesterday." She absorbed this. The warmth in her face didn't disappear. She was better than that, but it rearranged itself. "Oh, I didn't know your dad had a separate will." "Neither did I said. "Until he was already gone." She asked a few more questions, each one careful, each one feeling its way toward something. I answered them without giving her anything she could use. We had dinner at the house. She talked about Portland, about work, about a vacation she thought we should take. I listened. I thought about my father at that workbench, year after year, measuring things carefully. I thought about what it takes to prepare quietly for something you hope won't happen but know probably will. That night, after she was asleep, I sat at my father's kitchen table with a cup of coffee and a yellow legal pad. I wrote down everything I wanted to keep and everything I was willing to walk away from. When I looked at the list, the right side was much shorter than I expected. Turns out I didn't need very much that was tied to her name. I drove back to Portland 2 days later. I called Theo from the car. He told me the filing was ready whenever I was. "I'm ready," I said. My wife was served the following Thursday. I was at the workshop in Crestview when it happened. I know because she called me 11 times between 9 and 10 in the morning. I let each one ring through. On the 12th call, I picked up. "What is this?" Her voice had dropped all the performance. It was flat and cold and oddly relieved me, because at least it was real. "It's straightforward," I said. "Theo can explain anything you have questions about. You can't be serious. Daniel, we can work through this. Whatever you think you heard." "I know what I heard," I said. "So do you?" "The workshop isn't even it's not worth." "It's not about the workshop," I said. "It never was." She was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice was different. Smaller. "You were always going to be like this," she said. "You were always going to choose that place over us." I looked around the workshop. The half-finished rocking chair in the corner. The tools on their pegboard wall, everyone outlined in pencil. The light coming through the high windows the way it had come through since I was a boy, angled and clean and smelling of pine. "I didn't choose the workshop over us," I said. "You did." I hung up. My brother tried once more, 2 weeks later. He sent a text asking if we could talk. I replied with Gerald Holt's contact information and nothing else. I stayed in Crestview. I requested remote work from my employer and they agreed. I slept in my father's house for the first time since I was 18, in the small bedroom that still had the same plaid curtains it had when I left. I ate breakfast at the same kitchen table. I walked out to the workshop every morning before the dew was off the grass. I finished the rocking chair. It took me 3 weekends. I'd watched my father build enough of them that my hands remembered the process even before my mind did. Final sanding, Danish oil finish, 2 coats. I set it on the porch when it was done and sat in it while the sun went down over the Douglas firs. It was solid. It held. Theo called me on a Thursday in late October to tell me the divorce was finalized. Oregon is a no-fault state. The workshop and land were separate property, untouched. The savings account, untouched. The shared apartment in Portland, the shared car, the shared furniture split cleanly and without drama, because there was nothing dramatic left to say. I didn't feel victorious when he told me. I felt the same thing I'd felt sitting in that workshop on the morning after my father's funeral, reading his letter for the 3rd time. Still, like something that had been leaning at a slight angle for years had finally been set straight. I had a contractor come out in November to assess the workshop. Not to sell or develop to expand. The back acre was flat and clear, good ground for a larger building. I'd been in contact with a woodworking school in Eugene, a small nonprofit that taught furniture making to adults transitioning out of long unemployment. They needed a permanent facility. What my father had built was almost exactly the right size, with room to grow. The director came up to see it on a gray November Tuesday. She walked through the way my father would have wanted someone to walk through slowly, touching things, noticing what was there. She picked up a hand plane from the wall and held it correctly without being shown. I liked her immediately. Your father built all this himself? She asked. Most of it, I said. Started in 1987. She set the plane back in its outline on the pegboard. He knew what he was doing. He did, I said. We worked out the details over the following weeks. The workshop would become a partnership, his land, their program, my involvement as a woodworking instructor on weekends. Not a charity. A continuation. The kind of thing that makes use of what exists rather than erasing it for something new. I also had the rocking chair appraised. The man who came out said it was worth more than I expected. Not because of materials. Because of the joinery. The way the pieces fit together, he said, was the mark of someone who had spent decades learning how wood wanted to move. I told him my father had made the joints. I had only finished the sanding. He said that was usually how the best things got made. I kept the chair on the porch. My brother called once more in December. He didn't leave a voicemail. I saw his name on my screen and waited, and when the call went silent, I felt nothing in particular. Not anger, not loss. Just the straightforward recognition of a distance that had existed long before I noticed it. Gerald Holt had coffee with me that same week. He told me my father had come to him 14 months ago, not with fear but with clarity. He'd sat in that office, Gerald said, and laid out exactly what he wanted and exactly why, and the only thing he'd asked was whether it would hold up. I told him it was airtight, Gerald said. He said good, and then he asked if I wanted to see pictures of a credenza he was building. I laughed. For the first time in months, I laughed without anything complicated behind it. My father had spent his whole life making things that would outlast him. Tables and chairs and cabinets built to hold the weight of real living. He had done the same thing with the will. With the letter? With the way he watched quietly for years and drew his own conclusions and prepared accordingly, not out of bitterness but out of love. The specific, careful, pine-scented love of a man who measures twice. He left me more than property. He left me the example of what it looks like to know your own worth without needing anyone else to confirm it. He left me the knowledge that the people who ask what something is worth and the people who ask how it was made are never the same people. And he left me the workshop, which smelled on that cold December morning exactly as it had always smelled, and exactly as I hoped it would smell for whatever years I had left to work inside it. I unlocked the side door. I had put a lock on it, which I think my father would have forgiven me for, and walked to the center of the room. Workbenches, tools, pegboard walls, windows casting long pale light across the floor. The chair I had finished was on the porch. The building I had agreed to expand was drawn out on paper on the workbench. The school would start its first session in March. I had no one to lie to. No one to manage or perform for, or watch carefully from across a room. Just the work, and the wood, and the smell of everything my father had built. I pulled out the letter from the inside pocket of my jacket. I carried it with me still. I read the last line the way I had read it 100 times since October. Keep what I built. Don't let them turn it into something it isn't. I folded it back along its original creases and held it for a moment. I kept it, Dad, I said to the empty workshop. To the tools on their wall. To the light in the windows and the pine in the air. Then I put the letter in my pocket, picked up a hand plane, and got to work.